You know when you go to a carnival and you see one of those games and you're like, I could do that. I could knock over those milk bottles. I played baseball in high school. And you conveniently ignore the people that maybe go before you and fail at that task. You see that no one's walking away with a big teddy bear up on the top shelf. You still believe that you've got a better than average chance of knocking them all down. That example of overconfidence in a rigged situation is what I'm going to use as a visual metaphor here to describe a handful of ways in which your mind is rigged against you. How it makes you overly confident in certain situations. The ideas that I'll be sharing here come from the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I will share 4 examples of how overconfidence can crop up in your life without you necessarily being aware of it, and 1 technique that you can employ to help combat that. One source of our overconfidence in future events stems from how we think about the past, specifically the illusion of understanding that comes when we spend time in Monday morning quarterback mode, looking back at a past situation, explaining with complete confidence why things happened the way they did, emphasizing the things that you knew were going to happen all along, as you create this nice, tidy story in your brain about what happened and why. You craft for yourself a good story that simplifies the events into a cohesive narrative. But in that oversimplification, we tend to do away with nuance and complexity and the role of luck because those complicate our tidy view of the world. And it's that oversimplification of the past that contributes to us thinking we know how the world works and we can make good predictions about what might happen next. But confidence in our predictions of the future is very often unwarranted, and this is where the illusion of validity comes in. Here Kahneman gives an example of evaluating potential future leaders based on a 2-hour group exercise, where a challenge is placed to the group, in this case a physical one, moving a big log over a wall without the log or any of those people touching that wall. And the folks who observe that activity rate each individual on their future potential as a leader with fairly definitive scores, because you get to see who steps up in a challenging situation, who backs down when their idea isn't taken on by the rest of the group, who just does what they're told but doesn't come up with any ideas of their own. And despite the confidence that you might have as that observer in determining who's going to go far and who won't cut it, follow-up has shown that those ratings that you give based on that 2-hour observation don't actually correlate to long-term performance. They're not indicative of what that individual is actually capable of, because you can't extrapolate long-term potential by evaluating one particular performance that had a specific set of circumstances surrounding it. But because of the way that our brain likes to create these tidy, coherent stories for us, stories about people that are often heavily influenced by our first impressions, this type of rating of potential and confidence in those ratings continues to happen, even when they hear that those ratings don't correlate with future performance. Even when we've got compelling data in front of us, we still like to trust our gut. We think that our intuition is better than those numbers, that data, or any particular algorithm. An example that came up here was counselors predicting student success based on things like an essay, maybe an hour-long conversation, and perhaps some test scores. Another example is going through the hiring process. How much credence is given to the impressions gleaned from a 45-minute conversation compared to looking back at the past performance of that individual and using that as an indicator of likely performance in the future. This sense that my feeling is better than your formula, which isn't to neglect the role that feelings play in processing the world. As we learned from the book The Extended Mind, paying attention to your body can provide a rich source of information. But in this case, when it comes to any form of evaluation, whether it be a doctor seeing a patient, a counselor working with a student, an employer hiring someone new, those situations allow for a huge amount of bias to enter into the decision-making process. That bias can be circumvented by identifying a handful of more objective measurements that actually do have a correlation to future performance, future risk, and future needs. Kahneman acknowledges that intuition can still play a role. It can be one of the factors worth considering in these evaluation type processes, but the intuition of a single person or a panel shouldn't be weighted too heavily compared to other indicators that are more objective. As humans, it can be hard for us to get behind that reliance on formulas. But once you acknowledge that relying on intuitive judgments can be inherently unethical, I think that opens the door for letting some other metrics into the picture. In certain situations, we also tend to focus a little bit too much on our specific situation without widening our view and paying attention to others who have gone through something similar. As an example of this inside view, Kahneman described a collaborative effort that he and some colleagues went through when developing a textbook. And at one point in the process, they each estimated how much longer they thought it would take for them to complete this textbook. The average came out to about 2 more years. But when one of the folks in that project was asked about other folks that he knew who had written textbooks, other groups, he conceded that on average for folks at that stage, it took about another 7 years to complete a textbook. Even when presented with that type of information, when you hear about how long it takes someone else to complete a particular task, our mind tricks us into believing that we are distinctly different than that average, that we can do it in 2 years when others did it in 7. We like that story better. We prefer that inside view. When in reality, taking on an outside view, looking at how others have completed a similar task and how long it took them, that can be a lot more helpful in the planning process. So these here are 4 ways in which overconfidence can creep its way into your life and work and predictions about the future and how you approach your planning. But it's not all bad news. There was one specific technique that was found to be helpful in combating that default to overconfidence that our mind takes, and that technique is a pre-mortem. This is where you take some time at the early stages of a project to think about all the things that could go wrong. Because often our overconfidence comes from an assumption that everything's going to go smoothly. Nothing's going to interrupt our plans. Things will work exactly how we laid them out. But of course, that rarely, if ever, will happen. So going through a pre-mortem process, identifying what could go wrong, how you might respond to it, what those setbacks might mean in terms of timelines and effort required, that's how you can achieve a more realistic picture of how this particular project might unfold, so that you can both better allocate resources toward this project and also just have more realistic expectations, because unacknowledged and undeservedly high expectations can derail a project as quick as any other setback you might face. If you enjoyed these ideas, do go pick up the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. There's a lot more about how our brain works, the 2 systems that govern it, one fast, one slow. You'll see and hear me talking about those 2 systems in a future video. And if you enjoyed this sketching out of ideas, that is a skill that I teach over at verbaltovisual.com, where you can learn how to create visual artifacts like this one to better remember, work with, and share interesting ideas. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.